Welcome to this Business Central launch event session, What's New in Business Central Telemetry. This is session 2 out of 2 about telemetry in this launch event. And where the first session was more about user scenarios for project managers or product managers, this session is more for the feinschmeckers. This is like going into details, tips and tricks. So let's go and see what we have of new telemetry. 2 things on the agenda. New signal. So what new data do you have since October? And some tips and tricks around telemetry that might make you more productive around using telemetry data. So let's dive in. We added a lot of new different things to telemetry over the last 6 months. It might be just tiny tweaks, so new dimensions, or it might be complete new events. And I'll give you an overview of what you have, and then hopefully you can use this data for a lot of things to get more data-driven. As part of environment lifecycle, as you probably have noticed in March this year, the administrator can what we call soft delete environments, and then later on they will be deleted, and in between it's possible to say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't want this to be deleted, and that's what we call a recover. So all of these events, environment marked for deletion, recovered, and permanently deleted, have been added to environment telemetry in March 2023. So when you see this actually already exists if you use telemetry for online environments. This does not exist for on-premises environments because this is logged as part of the infrastructure we use for environment management online. Feature telemetry. So in Business Central, there's a page called Feature Management, and in here the administrator can turn things on and off. And as of version 22.0, you now get telemetry on these actions. So you can actually start to track if customers change these. And of course, you can alert on them. So let's say that you managed 100 different customers. You can get alerts in Teams about if some of them try things out, and maybe especially if they try things out where you say, this is not something we want you to experiment with. The Performance Toolkit, Business Central Performance Toolkit, or BCPT for short, is something that allows any developer to run performance suites, and the results of these tests are now emitted to telemetry if you have enabled telemetry, so that you can track performance of your apps over time, and hopefully also use this to track regressions of performance for these scenarios when you run them again and again. So this is emitted both for environment telemetry and app telemetry. Client actions, brand new. This is, you might have seen the new hyped feature analysis mode or data analysis on lists. In here, the user needs to toggle and turn something on. And this is now locked to what we call client action telemetry. This is the first of hopefully many actions that we will log here. So you can use this to track whether your users start using data analysis. And again, of course, absence of this means they don't. This was also added in version 22.0. Feature telemetry is a way where you as an app developer can get insights into how people use your feature if errors occur in your feature. If you misconfigure feature telemetry, you won't get any data. You're missing out data for your users. And with this feature telemetry improvement, we make it easier for you to track whether this happens. So you can alert on that and hopefully fix that mistake in your app code so that you start getting usage and error and uptake telemetry for your features. Permissions. So as over the last year, we have gradually moved that you can change permissions in extensions. You can change permissions in metadata, with metadata. And with that, we're also losing out in the changelog if changes to permission systems happens through apps. So therefore, we added telemetry for this in version 22. You can track security changes done by apps using this telemetry. For job queue, we did a couple of things. This is in the category of all the little things. These are all the small things where we learn telemetry is great, but if we could just have this, we could make it even better. So in 21.3, we added a new dimension for the AL stack trace for the job queue. If you have failed job queues, you get the AL stack trace. This allows you to find out where exactly in AL code did this error occur and make it much easier to troubleshoot failed job queue entries. When we were there, we also found out that it would be nice to know also the job queue object name and description, so that for all job queue telemetry in version 22.0, you get these extra dimensions, and that makes it also easier to track and troubleshoot job queues with telemetry. For task scheduler, we in the server changed that you can in 22 not spin up a scheduled tasks with a timeout that is higher than the allowed max timeout. So if you do so, we now log to telemetry that you did that, so that we have what we do is we in the server adjust your timeout to the allowed max value, and then we emit to telemetry that we did this. So you can see this, you can look in telemetry and alert if you somehow configure your timeouts with too high values. Extension lifecycle. So there is a new event here that makes it easier to troubleshoot extension lifecycle. This was because we were a bit too aggressive on an event called extension already synced or synchronized that would flood telemetry about this event when you had extension synchronization. So instead we split this in two, and we have this new event triggered LC0056 that happens if you have this, you're not synchronizing because an extension was always synchronized. This will actually make all your reports on extension lifecycle much easier to understand, because we are removing noise from extension lifecycle. Errors. We know errors happen in the system. If you want to troubleshoot errors until version 21.4, we would put the error message in the language of the user experiencing the error. So error telemetry, if whenever you get an error dialog as a user, we log that to telemetry. Now, that might be hard if you have users from Romania and UK and Denmark, that you then get the error messages in the languages they get presented in the client. So with this version 21.4, we add an additional dimension, which is the error message in English. So it's much easier to troubleshoot these. We also, if you have incoming web service calls, we now also add two new dimensions, diagnostics message and failure reason, so that you can, for failed incoming web service requests, you can get a much easier understanding of why they failed. Not only before you just got an HTTP return code different than 200, now you actually get some kind of indication of which AL method or error was occurring for this incoming web service call to fail. For performance telemetry, we did at least 3. We probably have a few more. Incoming web service calls, whenever someone calls in with a web service to Business Central that is online or on premises, if we can only handle this much in the server. So we have a queue that incoming web service calls gets into, and that queue size is currently 95, and then we have 5 concurrent slots to be able to run web service calls. So the time you spend in that queue, if you're sending a lot of web service calls, you might spend some of your, let's say, performance time in the queue before you actually start running that. And with this version, with 22.0, we tell you what is the time you spend in the request queue. That's the first part here, the request queue time. The second here is we log whenever you have long-running AL happening. That AL method might be due to that you are talking to the database. So now we have these two dimensions. How many rows did you read and how many SQL statements did you execute during the duration of this long-running AL method? And finally, for outgoing web service calls, we now tell you the client type, whether it's a UI session or a web service or background or whatever it is. This is important because outgoing web service calls is blocking the UI thread. So if you have code that runs with someone using the web client or any client, and you wait for some outgoing, like some service out there for 10 seconds, that user will just see a spinning wheel. So by looking at outgoing web service telemetry filtered to client type web client, and then look at the execution time, you can find out where you are blocking the user because you're calling out to external services. You could be the pretended extension that you developed, or if it's an app source app, you can see that that's happening there, and you can contact the ISV and say, don't do that. I actually already mentioned this for OData, diagnostics, message, and failure reason. So this allows you to troubleshoot these. And that's kind of what we added for telemetry. We actually added a few more, but they're not quite ready, so I want to present them a little later. Once they are kind of mature and ready, we'll document them and make sure that they have samples and so on. So we have at least a few more signals coming up in email telemetry and a few more things coming up for job queues, and stay tuned on various media and then you will learn about those. Okay, tips and tricks. So that's the second part of this session. The first is that for on-premises customers or environments, we got the feedback that it's hard to use telemetry because you can only set the AD tenant and not the environment name, and that makes it hard to distinguish this signal is coming from this customer, this signal is coming from this customer, if you want to use the same telemetry database for multiple customers or environments. Actually, we found out it is possible to set environment name when you mount a tenant, if you use multi-tenancy mode, which you should. If you do so, we in the server will log the environment name you set to the environment name dimension, and that solves part of that problem. In Docker, this is hopefully going to happen. I have to speak with Freddy now. I put it here in the launch event, so I think he just needs to help me make it happen. I should have hidden this slice, but maybe that's fine. Let's put some pressure on Freddy to make it happen also for Docker. We get a lot of questions about the cost of telemetry. So we decided simply to put in some guidance directly into the documentation, how you can control your telemetry costs. So at the landing page for telemetry, there's simply a section now that tells you how can you control and monitor the cost of telemetry. And similarly, some of the guidance that were previously just on BC Tech repo, this is now directly in docs. So there's also part of our normal documentation, how you learn more about KQL and different tools so that you could be more productive with telemetry. So this is embedded directly into our documentation now. And speaking of tools, one of my favorite tools with telemetry is Custo Explorer, or another name of this is Azure Data Explorer. It is possible to connect this not only to what Data Explorer is, log analytics, but you can actually use this to also query application insights tables. So this is documented on docs, how you can do that. And now you have a different client that I prefer, a native client instead of a web client, with some better, in my opinion, better tooling to query telemetry. So if that's your thing, that's available for you. If you use web services to call in Business Central, you would have a client code somewhere. If you are not using Power BI or Power Automate or some of the services, you write code to write a web service client. If you want to know in telemetry, like what is the name of this client, or actually, in telemetry you get signal about incoming web service calls. If you set the user agent HTTP header in your client code, this will also be logged in telemetry. So now you can see this particular incoming call was coming from my client. Similarly, if you use application insights or other telemetry techniques with your web service client, you can actually put in the HTTP header client request ID, and we will log that in Business Central telemetry as well. So you can correlate your own telemetry for your outside services with Business Central telemetry using this trick. We got some feedback about the Power BI apps that whenever you update them, I publish a new version of the apps every month, at least for now. Whenever you update your app, you lose the dataset connections. Well, you don't have to. There are different ways to update an app. The first one here, when you update a Power BI app, is update both the workspace and the app. This will override your dataset settings. But if you choose the second option here, update only workspace content without updating the app, we will not, or Power BI will not change the dataset settings. So this is the one you want to use if you're updating your apps and you don't want to change the dataset parameters. We also got some feedback about, is it possible to update? We have many Power BI apps in production. Can we update them without human intervention? And yes, you can do that. There are some links here for the Power BI documentation. You can automate your install and updates of dataset parameters. So go check this Power BI documentation if that's your thing. If you manage many Power BI app installations. What else? We added some helper queries that make it easy for you to monitor things. The first here is if you want to alert on any change to environments, and that change can be basically anything we have telemetry on. So it could be an environment change, company change, extension, index, field change, anything that smells of life cycle of change management is compiled in this humongous query. So you can plug that into a logic app and just get alerted on changes happening to systems. It could be that you want to alert the IT department, or you want to get alerts across environments that you manage for different customers. We have a new report coming in the March release for environment telemetry, where you can calculate what we call DAO, WOW, MAO, daily, weekly, and monthly active users. So that comes with a KQL query if you want to calculate it yourself. It's also part of the Power BI app for environments. And guess what? Since we published this sample, lots of ISVs contacted me and said, we want the same. Now for ISVs, for your apps, it might be that we don't actually log the users to your telemetry, but we still log the environment information. So for you, you're gonna get not DAO, WOW, MAO, but you will get DAT, WAT, MOT, which would be daily active tenants, weekly and monthly active tenants. So this is already on BC Tech as a sample and will come hopefully in the April release for the app version of the Power BI app. All right, Another thing is what types of licenses do users have? This is only for environment telemetry. So we have this event RT003, which is on company open, succeeded. And in there is a dimension called entitlement sets IDs. So very cryptic. It's actually not that cryptic. Entitlements is AD speak of permissions. So whatever is in this dimension, these are some GUIDs. You can actually look these GUIDs up on the Active Directory documentation, what they mean, and therefore you can translate whatever is in this dimension to what license the user had. So that's already in as a sample that you can use to analyze. I'm not sure whether it's still in the Power BI app. I have to double check. I don't remember if I added that. Configuration changes. So here's a small trick that I think you should really consider using. In Business Central, there's a feature called field monitoring or sensitive field monitoring. If you set that up on different fields, you can get emails or telemetry on changes. So you would be able to see who changed what when. And the actual to and from values is also logged to change log. This was thought of, field monitoring was thought of as you want to monitor changes to bank accounts or something that is sensitive so that you know that you can be alerted on fraud. But here's a trick. Why not also set up field monitoring on configuration changes? Because that gives you telemetry on all configuration changes happening in the system. Wouldn't that be nice? I think it would. Then final trick here is if you write a lot of KQL, especially for the schema of application insights, we put a lot of things into this custom dimension. This is a JSON structure. If you do things like custom dimensions dot, say, event ID equals something, or other where clauses before you actually go into the fun part of the KQL query. Since this custom dimensions is a JSON structure, whenever you do custom dimensions dot something, application insights or log analytics, the back end of application insights, would actually need to pass the full JSON structure to be able to do this. Instead, if you do just this predicate first, so dimensions without any dot into something, has operator, this can just do a normal string has. So treating custom dimensions as a string and see, does this string contain this XXXX string? And then later on, you can go in and specify something. This is very, very useful because this, you don't need to pass the full JSON to ask if this is happening, and you can filter very early things away before you actually go and need pass JSON structures. So this can be very, very effective if you run Custo queries on application insights. I'm beginning slowly to put this into all the KQL samples. When I'm visiting a sample, I'll make sure it's like that. But if you write lots of KQL, this can save you a lot of time when you run queries. All right, that's it. I know it was super techy, detailed, but that's I think this session is exactly for you. You made it to the end, and congratulations. Just some resources before I wrap up. aka.ms/BC telemetry. This is where the docs landing page for everything related to telemetry that we put in docs. And this is where most things eventually will land, such as how to control costs, how to use the Power BI app, how to set alerts, and so on. So go check that out. Use that as the entry point to everything related to telemetry. And second is telemetry samples. That's the second URL, aka.ms/BC telemetry samples. This is where typically code samples come in early on, all the code for the Power BI apps is here, KQL samples, and maybe also guidance that is not necessarily ready for docs, or maybe it shouldn't be on docs. You can find that here. To make it easier for you to follow along what's happening, since October last year, I started a newsletter on LinkedIn. So if you want to get a monthly update on tips and tricks and what's coming and so on, then subscribe to that. We have 1,700 plus subscribers at the moment. So this is where you get like monthly updates and you get it in your email, and you can just browse through and see if there's something new for you to take home to your organization. All right, that's it. Some go-dos. First of all, set up telemetry. But when you do, make sure you control and monitor your costs. Look at the docs so you don't get any surprises. Second, use the maturity model. There's a maturity model for how to use telemetry in your organization. It's a playbook of how to be more partner data-driven, and that the maturity model was mentioned in the part 1 of this session, the data-driven part of the launch event on telemetry. Install and use the Power BI apps. Would really try to use the apps to the Power BI to take telemetry as data into telemetry as insights. So having visualizations and a way to slice and dice and pre-built reports, both as a VAR and as an ISV, is something that hopefully can change a lot. There's one as a VAR for customer projects and one ISV version for patented extensions and app source apps. And then instead of just having data and insights, why not make it actionable? And that's where alerts really shine. So there's first of all on docs, like how do you alert? Then on BC Tech, we have sample alerting queries. So on docs, you can just click and get a logic app deployed that can start alert to email, Teams, whatever you like. And the only thing you need for that app is plug in a condition. What would you like to alert on? And that's all these alerting samples on BC Tech is, do you want to alert on this? Copy this in, and now you're suddenly alerting on that. There's a new kit on the blog for alerting called Power BI Metrics. Go to the first session where I talk a lot more about how to do that. You can utilize, if you already use the Power BI app, hopefully you do, then you can, with no extra costs, it's part of your Power BI Pro license, set up alerting on different metrics in the apps, and suddenly you just get alerted directly in Teams when things happen. So go check out the first part of the telemetry session to learn about how to use Power BI metrics to alert on telemetry. So that's the last start using the alerts, Power BI metrics. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening in, and go watch all the other exciting things that are happening in the launch event. Thank you.